Today I'm going to go over placing and formatting text in Adobe InDesign. I have CS5, but this will relate to some of the other versions as well. Go ahead and, if you want to follow along, open up InDesign, and if you go to File, New, Document, and you can just have letter size, that's fine. Orientation, mine is going to be portrait. Landscape would be looking from the side, lengthwise. But I suggest just keep it on portrait for this example. Columns we're going to come back to. You could set the columns here to say 5 columns or 4 columns or whatnot. I'm just going to keep it 1 for now, but I'm going to show you how to change it later. Margins, I'm just going to keep it to the default of 3 picas. That's don't have to worry about it too much in this example, but it's just that kind of pink and purple line that goes around the edge. That is not the edge of the page, it's actually the edge of the margins. A lot of people make that mistake of designing to that, but actually the edge of the page is the black line there. And then just hit OK, and you'll just have a layout that looks something like this. Now make sure you have the tools over there on the side. If you don't, go to Window, then Tools, and also make sure you have Control checked, which is up here, kind of like the options for each tool that we have select. Now if you want to go ahead and download the support file, you can. It's the Alice in Wonderland introduction, public domain. I'm sure not the photo, but the Word document. Or you can use a Word document that you have. It doesn't matter. It can just be some generated fill text, or it can be, say a report you've written for school or something like that. That's fine as well. But as long as you have a Word document that has text in it. So what you want to do is go ahead and go to File, Place. That's how it works in InDesign. And I'm going to select Alice in Wonderland, this Word document here. And notice I have Replace Selected Item not checked. I didn't have anything selected anyway. But when you're placing some things like photos, for example, and you have a photo selected, and you have Replace Selected Item selected here, it's going to actually replace that. But I don't want to replace anything I have selected, even though I don't. I just like to keep it unchecked there. So I'm going to hit Open. And the cursor kind of turns into the very beginning of the text there, so it's kind of blinking there as I move it around. If you just left click and then let go, it goes ahead and places this text on this page, and you'll notice it stops at the margin, okay, automatically. And now I'm going to hit Control Z, or on Mac it'd be Command Z, but I'm going to just click and drag there instead of just clicking. And then you'll notice that you actually can place it in sort of a column there, but you don't know how wide this is without measuring it. You're not sure if the different columns would work together. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to hit backspace, or you can just hit delete on the Mac, and we'll delete that text for now because I'm going to add some columns first, because columns are often good whether you're dealing with a printed product or even an online magazine that you can see on the screen. You might want to add columns. Okay, so go to Layout and then Margin and Columns. And then here, I'm just going to do 4 columns for this example. The gutter is the space in between the columns. If you'll notice, as long as you have Preview checked, it shows what it'll look like up there. So you have gutter, 1 pica. I'm going to hit OK. And next I'm going to go File, Place, Alice in Wonderland, Document again, hit Open. And you'll notice here, if I just click and let go, instead of going all the way across the page like it did with the other, except it stopped at the margins, this one actually flows nicely in the column. And you may be thinking, well, that's not the entire Word document. How do I get the rest out there? Well, this red little cross sign there, that means there's more text that needs to be placed. Okay, so what you do is you click that once, and then go back up to the top here, and you can click that in. This is if you just want to manually flow it. And then same thing, each time pressing that red cross sign, the wherever you click next, it will insert it. Okay, so you have even more. So what you want to do is, if you wanted to move some of it to the next page, we only have 1 page here. Bottom of the Pages palette, if you don't have it up, you can go to Window, then Pages. Just press this Add New Page column there, and what you can do is press the space bar, click and drag. It turns into the hand tool there to move around, just like in Photoshop. And you can press this, red cross there. And you can press the spacebar again to turn it into the move tool. And you can float down here. Notice this one doesn't have the margins. We could go to margins, but I'm just going to float there to show you the rest of it there, okay? The neat thing about this is if you add some space here, it's going to push the rest down, okay? It's actually programmed to flow from here, the bottom of the first column, up to the top of the second column, bottom of the second, up to the top of the third, and so on. Okay, so if you add something, delete some, it'll work out. Now once you have this text placed, you can format in various ways, and there's many things to consider. But basically, we want to think about the paragraph settings of it, how it's justified, and also the character, okay, the font style, size, and a lot of the other formatting things can be considered. So each of these placed text boxes are separate ones. You can move them around, but they still are kind of linked in that the text from here flows from the bottom to the top of that one, okay? And then the rest of it is down there in a single column. Now one thing to consider as far as design considerations, if you do Command plus or Control plus to zoom in, these are not aligned perfectly. You can tell by if you have the ruler up here. If you don't, go to View, Show Rulers. But you can click and drag a guideline down and put it right along the bottom. Actually, these are pretty close as far as being aligned. See, if you had this one was slightly up, I like to put the guideline right along the bottom of the first line there, and you can kind of see that they are aligned. Another way to do that, you can have them automatically aligned. If you go to Window, type in Tables, then Paragraph. This brings up the paragraph palette, and you can actually, if you just use the text tool there and click in anywhere, do Control A to select it all. Sometimes if you want to change all the text at once, you could press this and it would, it actually almost like double spaces it there, and you can change that in here, but it's often going to automatically align it, or you can just press the one there, and I like to use the one that's not aligned and just manually align it, but it's really up to you. While we're on the paragraph palette, there's a couple things to consider here. This is all left justified. If you notice, it's all left justified. It is kind of ragged on the edge there. It's not straight. It's just left justified, the default. If you press centered right here, which is also up on here on the control palette, but if you press the center, then everything's centered, of course, which you may use for perhaps a title or right justified. All right, those are pretty simple. Now this fourth one is full justified, and what it does is it doesn't stretch the very last line in each paragraph all the way across, but everything else is. So they either compress or stretch spacing in between the words so that you get this nice little column here. If I click and hold onto the bottom of the tool palette and go to preview, it kind of shows you there's that line. That's what a lot of publications do. Okay. Otherwise, you can just left justify it, and then you don't have the spacing in between that's different, but then you do have this kind of curvy edge on the side. Thing to watch out when you full justify it is you want to watch out for some badly stretched text or spaces. See, that's not too bad because it's a large column there, but if you had this column here, these are relatively wider, but if you didn't have it as wide there, what could happen is, see that make it smaller, you get some problems once in a while. It doesn't look too bad, but sometimes a word will be too stretched out. There'll be a large space in between two words, but InDesign's usually pretty good about that. But sometimes you may have to look out. So there's not, say for example right here, the rabbit hole went. See how there's that large space in there? Sometimes you want to look out for that. If you can, you'd make the column a little bit bigger, or you can make it smaller. But if the columns are pretty much set, some options you have is to choose the text tool, click and drag over it, and either the paragraph or the line or the sentence. You could adjust the tracking up here, but it's probably not going to work in this example. It may, but you'll notice it doesn't. It just basically stretches the letter spacing off just a bit. So one thing to think about is the tracking that you could use. Tracking is basically up at the top. If you click and drag over this paragraph here, I'll show you what I mean. Right up here where it says AV and it's got the little double-sided arrow below it, that's tracking. What tracking is I go to -100, it reduces the spacing in between all the letters. Okay. If I do 100 plus, then it maximizes the spacing in between all the letters and words. If I do 0, that's the default. Kerning is a little bit different, and usually you'll use kerning if you have a large title and a word like a Y is kind of too close to the letter, such as Y is too close to the letter next to it. You would just put the cursor, instead of just selecting a whole word or sentence or paragraph, you just click the cursor in between two letters. And then the kerning up here, if you'll notice, it reduces the spacing in between two letters specifically. Or it can increase the spacing in between two letters. Okay, so that's kerning and tracking up at the top. On the paragraph palette, a couple other things to consider. You'll notice this Word document already had spaces in between. So if I go back here and just press enter, it does this kind of first line space and after the paragraph space. You can change those. I'm going to select everything by doing Control A, Command A on the Mac, and make this 0, and then make that 0 as well. And you'll notice over on the side, there's no spacing in between paragraphs. But that doesn't look right because the paragraphs kind of run together, so what you want to do is add a slight indent. So I select it all, and this second option right here on the paragraph palette, it's the first line indent. You can press 1P for 1 pica indent, and you'll notice we have a nice indent for every single new paragraph. You could change that to 2 pica if you want, for a little bit more obvious indent, or whichever. Okay. Now sometimes the Word documents will already have a tab in there, so you need to go through and remove all the tabs manually by backspacing, pressing in there, backspacing, getting rid of it. Now this one you can't because it's just coded in here in InDesign already. You want that because otherwise if you add this, it'll be a very large indent, and it's a lot better to add the indents automatically here than entering them in with a tab. Okay, a couple other things to consider: the left and right options right here. All that does is move the text in, buffers it a little in from the left or the right. I don't really use that a whole lot. And as far as these two, that's kind of extra space above and below paragraphs. I usually don't use those either that much unless you have a block of text, and when you're designing for the screen especially, you may have a block of text that you just want to keep nice and short and spaces in between. So you have single space paragraphs but spaces in between the paragraphs just so it's easier to read. So that's one example. You can also make the first letter very large in a layout as well, or make it wider. And then hyphenate is just that. If you uncheck it, it's not going to hyphenate any words that are broken up. And then if you do hyphenate, notice right here, country, the word country is hyphenated. Okay? So that's the basics of the paragraph palette. Now, if you go to Window, Type in Tables, Character, this is where you can control the font. It's also, a lot of the options are up here as well on the control palette. Alice, for example, if I want to make that larger, just click and drag over it with the text tool, and you can press this and make it 72. You could type in 200, a larger one. You can change font sizes, and you can also change, of course, the kerning and tracking and the spacing also of the entire paragraph. So let's say I took this whole paragraph and I'm going to make it all just 12 points so it's consistent. Automatically it adds a spacing as 14.4. You can set it to auto and it'll automatically do it. If you want more spacing, do 36, and you notice it does pretty large spacing there. If you want smaller, it jumbles together. Okay, So the best thing to do usually just do auto, unless you think it's too far away or too close, leave spaced. And then of course regular, the usual things you think about in Word, italic, bold, and bold italic, also available down here on the character palette. Okay. So that's the basics of placing and formatting text. In other tutorials I will go over text wrap and other ways of designing either for print or the screen. Thank you.